Whether it was taping the top 40 off the radio or making backups of your own computer games, audio cassettes really were a significant part of growing up for many of us. So why don't we take a closer look at what all the fuss was about. Yes, audio cassettes, those little plastic oblongs that contain mysterious reels of magnetic tape, opening up a world of musical, audio and gameplay possibilities. I'm RetroSteveUK, and in this video we're going to be looking into what they are, where they came from, and most importantly, what they meant to us. Cassette players and tapes gave us not only a flexible and convenient way to listen to music at home and on the go, but also gave us opportunities for creative expression simply by allowing us to record and play back audio in ways that had never been possible before with other audio formats. We'll be exploring some of these things later in the video, as well as considering the relevance of tapes in our modern technological era, and definitely watch out for the featured comment section coming up later too, as the memories that some of you shared about your experiences with cassettes provided a wealth of nostalgic callbacks that I wouldn't otherwise have thought to include in this video. Some real nostalgia gold there. We ought to cover a brief history of audio cassettes and what exactly they are, so starting from 1963, when the compact cassette was first introduced by Philips, the technology gradually gained traction in the public marketplace, as music albums were released on pre-recorded cassettes, and blank cassettes provided a way for the average Joe to easily record sound, either directly from other sources like radios and record players, or through microphones plugged directly into cassette tape recorders. Cassettes were able to store sounds on reels of magnetically sensitive tape. This would be passed over a reading head that was able to convert the magnetic signals back into sound. Home recording was made possible by a second head that could convert sound into the magnetic signals that were stored on the tape. An internal magnet would first erase whatever was recorded on the tape previously, preparing the way for the recording head to generate new magnetic signals. This method allowed cassettes to be used repeatedly, recording lots of different things with hardly any loss of quality in the short term. If you're curious about how cassettes were able to store stereo sound on both sides of one cassette, it's simply because the tape was divided into 4 parallel strips. Only 2 strips will be read by a cassette player at any one time, allowing for the left and right stereo signals to be read separately and simultaneously. Flip the tape over and you get side B running in the other direction. Over the years we had cassette players built into hi-fi systems for home use, portable radio cassette players powered from the mains or batteries, often referred to now as boomboxes, and of course the now iconic personal stereo, the most famous of these being Sony's Walkman, which revolutionised music listening by providing the first ever truly portable music experience, complete with stylish orange foam headphones of course. Sadly, as the 1990s progressed and CD players became cheaper and more common, the writing was on the wall for the humble compact cassette, and the format eventually faded into obscurity in favour of the far superior sound quality and convenience of the compact disc. Of course, the humble compact cassette had many different uses, but by far the most common was for music. Whether you were buying your shop-bought albums on cassette or using blank tapes to duplicate and share music, cassettes were cheap to make and cheap to buy, and their small size even made them more popular than compact discs for some, at least until MP3 players came along in the 2000s. It's often said anecdotally that the sound quality of cassettes was awful, with prominent background hiss and audio wobble, also known as wow and flutter, being a common experience. But I can tell you from experience that a decent quality tape in a decent quality cassette player was easily able to rival the quality of a compact disc. It's just, as is often the case, you get what you pay for, and unfortunately most of us could only afford crappy tape players and cheap blank tapes, so our collective memory of cassette quality, generally speaking, is quite bad. One of the other major uses for cassettes, mainly in the 1980s, was for data storage. Floppy disk was the standard form of computer data storage for businesses at the time, but for those of us with cheaper 8-bit home computers like the Commodore 64, Sinclair Spectrum and Amstrad machines, cassettes were by far the cheapest option, not only for home users but for manufacturers too. It wasn't all plain sailing though, as compared to floppy disks, programs and games on cassette took much longer to load and didn't offer any way for a computer to quickly index and locate files stored on the tape. The best we could hope for at home was a tape counter on our cassette player and a pencil and paper to write down the numbers, allowing us to manually locate a saved program before loading it into the computer. You couldn't argue with the cost though, with games at the time being more expensive on floppy disk, as well as the disk drives themselves being prohibitively expensive for kids desperately eking out their pocket money to buy the latest games. The other advantage of cassette games, at least for the home user, was the fact that they were so easy to duplicate. All you needed was a basic twin-deck cassette recorder and hey presto, all your games and your mates' games too were easily shareable for free, copied onto cheaply available blank cassettes. So what next for the humble compact cassette? Is there a place in the 21st century for music and games stored on cassette? Well, for purely practical reasons, definitely not, as they're a cumbersome and inconvenient way to store and listen to music. And let's face it, back when game files were only in the region of 16 to 128 kilobytes in size, but still took minutes to load in, can you imagine how long the tape would have to be now to store the multiple millions of kilobytes that modern games take up these days? If we're talking nostalgia though, cassette tapes are definitely worth preserving, even if only for historical purposes, and there's currently a growing collector's market for second-hand cassette albums and blank tapes. For those of us that lived through that heyday, cassettes are super nostalgic, not to mention super cool for modern hipster types who perhaps did not live through that time, and you'll now find musicians and bands releasing music on cassettes as a curiosity, mainly because it's a cool thing to do. The biggest problem with cassette preservation though is the lack of decent quality cassette players. Sadly, modern units produced in recent years are designed to appeal to nostalgic types rather than audiophiles, so the demand for quality just isn't there. If you do want to get into playing tapes again though, for whatever reason, I can recommend two routes to go down. The first is to buy cassette players on the second-hand market. Vintage gear from an era that demanded sound quality is still capable of reproducing sound that comes close to rivaling modern formats. I'm lucky enough to still own my original 1990s hi-fi cassette deck, and we also have a unit in our living room that was manufactured in 1980, which cost about £60 on eBay. And if you do have old gear like this, it's definitely worth looking up YouTube tutorials on how to change the rubber drive belts in cassette players, as that's the #1 cause of cassette deck failure these days, as the rubber perishes over time. The second route is to buy new gear, bearing in mind of course that most of it now is crap. I recommend checking out Techmoan's YouTube channel as he covers a lot of this type of equipment, and I'm pleased to say he recently reviewed a new cassette player that's come on the market recently, which does a fairly decent job of playing cassettes. I'll put a link to that specific Techmoan video in the description, so I definitely recommend checking that out. Now I couldn't do a video about cassettes without mentioning the ZX Spectrum Next. This is a modern recreation of the ZX Spectrum using FPGA chip technology, but the twist is that as well as being compatible with every model of Spectrum that was originally released, it also adds new features like extra colours, better sound, faster processor speeds, hardware sprites, more memory and SD card storage, turning this into a super souped up Spectrum that we might have received as the next model in the Sinclair range if they hadn't stopped being produced. The big question is, can you load cassette games into this? And the answer is yes, but there's really no need, as it uses the SD card as a form of hard drive storage, so it now has a proper operating system and games load from digital files instantaneously. There's a thriving community of developers producing games for this thing too, most of which make great use of the next souped up hardware in creative ways. One example here is this reimagining of 1983's Jetpack, which was a single screen arcade shoot 'em up that ran on 16K Spectrums. The Spectrum Next version, Baggers in Space from Rusty Pixel Software, expands on the idea, introducing new gameplay mechanics and deep caverns to explore, as well as updating the graphics and sound. The game's available as a physical version on SD card and also as a digital download, and if you're wondering how this relates to cassettes exactly, I'm getting to that, as my current favourite game on the Next is simply called O, and as well as being a hugely entertaining platform game, its box has been designed to resemble an original ZX Spectrum cassette game release. Now I've been buying my Spectrum Next games as digital downloads for a while now, but this had me reaching for my wallet at the Crash Live Retro event last November thanks to its ingeniously designed SD card storage solution sitting inside a genuine cassette tape jewel case. Designed by Ronnie Simpson, who's responsible for a variety of cassette-related storage solutions, this is a perfect callback to the days when our computer games used to come on cassette, and it's a fitting way to house games for a modern, spiritual successor to the ZX Spectrum. O is available in a variety of formats, including digital download, and you can get more information at fusionretrobooks.com. And if you want to know more about the ZX Spectrum Next in general, I've put links to the official information page, as well as the official Facebook group in the video description. I asked for your comments and cassette memories to feature in this video, and you all had some pretty good stuff to share, a lot of which triggered memories for me that I hadn't thought of. So here it is, a few of your thoughts on the subject. To start with, we definitely need to cover the common practice that was a rite of passage for most of us, taping the top 40 chart rundown off the radio on a Sunday and making our own mixtapes. Mark Leet on YouTube personally remembers recording the top 40 from either BBC Radio 1 or Capital FM with a finger hovering over the pause button to make sure he didn't get the DJ speaking at the end of each song. It was the best way to make the greatest mixtapes. Big Bad John on Instagram also mentions mixtapes and the joy of recording your favourite songs in an order that meant something to you personally. I also have to add that mixtapes were a great way to express your love and appreciation of someone special in your life. I've made a few for my wife over the years, the first one being an actual cassette, which I called Me and You. But these days my medium of choice is a USB stick housed inside a cassette case, which I feel is an appropriate way to preserve the spirit of how mixtapes originally started out. Lozo Amiga on YouTube loved the social aspect of home piracy, going to your friend's house with a fresh C90 blank tape in your pocket, listening to music and talking, discussing the best ways to organise the tracks on a mixtape, which songs blended well into the next, and planning how each side of the tape would flow. A cracking way to spend an evening just chatting with your mates. Bredsky on YouTube talks about the challenges of fitting an entire vinyl album onto one cassette, working out how long the album was and maybe having to decide which songs to cut out if there just wasn't enough space. He also mentions the less common C120 cassettes, which could record up to 2 hours of music, but they were very fragile due to how much thinner the tape was. Fargo DeVille on YouTube shares a handy tip with us for working out where a particular song is located on a cassette. They used to use a pen to mark up where each song started on the clear bit of plastic that covered the reels. I can't believe I never thought of that. It's a simple solution that cuts out a lot of the guesswork when rewinding and fast forwarding. Speaking of creative uses for a cassette recorder, Mark at Lengthy Parsnips on Blue Sky used to record the audio from TV shows like Blackadder so he could listen to them on tape on the bus to school, and this triggered one of my memories of taking my Dixon's TR-17 into an arcade one summer holiday and recording the music from my favourite arcade games Chase HQ and Rastan Saga. I must have looked a right pillock in there pressing my cassette recorder up against the speaker grill. Rick Packer on YouTube brings up the subject of using a Bic ballpoint pen to wind the reels of a cassette tape after it had come unravelled. These pens were exactly the right width and shape to fit in between the teeth of the reels, whilst providing just the right amount of grip. It's like they were made for the purpose. A common fallacy is that pencils were used to do this, but pencils were just that little bit too narrow to be able to spin the reels comfortably. And oddly, this is a fallacy that's perpetuated when you see references to cassette tapes in modern culture. Of course, we wouldn't have needed those ballpoint pens if it wasn't for the fact that some tape decks had a tendency to fail at the one job they were designed for and would chew up our precious tapes instead of playing them. Jack Dubs on YouTube experienced joy and pain during his teenage years in the 90s, taping something really cool, only to hear that heart-wrenching sound of the tape crinkling as it was chewed up. Wayne's Weird World on YouTube offers his repair solution for when this happened by carefully snipping out the damaged sections and using sellotape to stick the tape back together. It may sound strange, but this does work, as it's something I did in my youth too, with great results, although I later realised that a little bit of Pritt stick works surprisingly well as a substitute for the sellotape. Generally, in my experience, it was the cheaper cassette decks that had a tendency to chew up tapes, with car stereos for some reason being the worst culprits. Ritmo on YouTube brings this up as he discovered while falling down a collecting rabbit hole recently just how many brands, formulations, variations and designs of cassette and cassette player there were, and how differently they could actually perform. I often say myself how amazing cassettes can sound with the right equipment, but as Ritmo points out, as kids we didn't really notice the lack of sound quality. It was just what you had and you didn't really know any different. You'd just enjoy listening to the music, but crucially it was your music, and that's all that really mattered. Paul Pablo Hind on Facebook also covers the different types and brands of cassettes available, mentioning TDK, which were always very reliable, and a brand that was sold in richer sounds shops called That's, which was superb apparently. He also mentions owning a few metal cassettes, which out of the three main types of cassette, ferric, chrome and metal, the metal type had the most amazing sound reproduction. Thomas Cook on Facebook remembers getting a 5-pack of TDK C90 tapes as a Christmas present and having to decide whether to use them for taping the top 40 or for copying Spectrum games, and he'd write the game names and tape counter numbers on the cassette inlay cards for easy reference. Those multi-packs are a nostalgic memory in themselves, and I can almost smell that fresh, plasticky smell right now, gently tearing the shrink wrap off a nice new fresh pack of gleaming TDKs. For backing up Spectrum games though, for me it was always a multi-pack of Boots C15 computer cassettes with 7.5 minutes on each side, as these were super cheap and it made for neater collecting just having one game on each side of a cassette. Those Write Protect tabs that cassettes had came up in the conversation with Alan Pryor on YouTube. These were the break-off plastic tabs that would prevent anyone from taping over your precious recordings. Shop-bought albums would always have these missing from the outset, as no one in their right mind would want to tape over an album they'd paid $5.95 for. But blank tapes had a little piece of plastic over the hole, which cassette recorders could mechanically detect, allowing recordings to be made on that particular cassette. If you wanted to Write Protect your recording, you'd snap off the tab to make it permanent. And if you changed your mind in the future and wanted to reuse the tape, you could solve the problem by sticking a bit of sellotape over the hole. So high tech, isn't it? A few people shared memories and pictures of the cassette players they had growing up. John McLennan Parrish on Facebook shared a picture of his first ever boombox, a Sanyo single-speaker radio cassette player, and mentions memories of recording the Top 40, his first ever album on cassette, 1999 by Prince, and of loading cassette games into his BBC Micro B. Moomin May on YouTube shared their memory of a snazzy red Seisho Walkman with graphic equalizer sliders embedded on the front, which was bought with saved up lunch money, and they'd secretly copy borrowed albums using their parents' twin deck, listening to these illegal recordings in bed under the duvet. I'm not sure which model of tape player that would have been, but this Seisho PS45EQ here is probably pretty close. Harry Kilmer on Blue Sky remembers having one of these glorious things, which he got when he was 9. I actually thought that was a Fisher-Price toy at first glance, but on closer inspection I realised it was actually quite a funky little piece of kit. He's since upgraded to a shiny modern DAP, digital audio player, complete with a case that makes it look like a cassette player, so he can listen to his prog rock in style. You can buy these at fiio.com, and apparently they now sell actual cassette players too. And finally, Steve Sharples on Facebook brings to mind how it felt for the first time discovering that you could actually record a moment in time and play it back. I, and I'm sure many of you, had the same experience, becoming instantly hooked and having hours of fun recording all sorts of things. And for me, those formative experiences cultivated an interest in audio technology that has stayed and grown with me through years of technological advancements and on into my adult life. Some good stuff there, so thanks for that. It really does add value to these videos. And if you have any more memories you'd like to share of your cassette tape days, or maybe about the equipment or collections you still have now, post them in the comments and we can chat about it there. Also, if you'd like to be featured in a future Retrospectives video, follow me on my various social media platforms, where I'll be asking for your comments whenever there's a featured comment section coming up. Well, that about wraps it up for now, so thanks again for all your comments, thank you for liking and subscribing, and of course thank you all for watching Retrospectives.